Hi, everybody. My name is Ayelet Tsabari Bernstein, and I'm the program director at Jewish Book Council. This conversation with the Global Jewish Literary Alliance is a meaningful addition to our work at Jewish Book Council of educating, enriching, and strengthening the community through Jewish literature. I know it's a particularly tough time right now, and so I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. It's so lovely to see you all here, and I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you on behalf of the Global Jewish Literary Alliance. We're thrilled to present the 2024 Global Jewish Literary Alliance Conversation, How to Tell a Jewish Story with Manya Wilkinson and Ayelet Tsabari, moderated by Emily Casriel. If you haven't already, I hope you'll purchase both authors' books today, Lublin and Songs for the Brokenhearted, to support their important work. Not only will they make perfect additions to your own library, but they make great gifts. If you don't know what the Global Jewish Literary Alliance is, allow me to introduce you. The Global Jewish Literary Alliance members are the Wingate Prize, the Jewish Book Council, JCCA Association of North America, and the Jewish Literary Foundation. The Global Jewish Literary Alliance aims to support a global ecosystem of Jewish arts and culture with a specific focus on the literary arts, helping writers connect to the resources they need to write Jewish books, connect readers to those works, and make sure that Jewish communities and institutions have the resources they need to create meaningful programs and events around Jewish literature. And now I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful moderator, Emily Casriel. Emily Casriel's book, Deep Listening, Transform Your Relationship with Family, Friends, and Foes, will be published by HarperCollins next week on June 24th. Emily is an award-winning journalist, editor, and media executive who worked for over 20 years at the BBC. She developed the deep listening approach during her time as a senior visiting research fellow at King's College London Policies Institute, building on her expertise as an accredited executive coach and workplace mediator. As well as her role at King's College, she is currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University and a trustee of the Wingate Foundation. Emily, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Evie, and for convening what I hope will be a very fascinating, compelling event. It will be so fascinating that I hope you're just going to stay with us and not get on your phone. And I know it's hard when everybody's checking updates from Israel, but I hope to take you away somewhere in this conversation and it will be nourishing and beautiful. So I'm really, really honored and excited to introduce the two authors today, Ayelet Tsabari, who is an Israeli-Canadian author. All four of her grandparents immigrated to Israel from Yemen, and Songs for the Broken-Hearted, like her previous book, not surprisingly, has attracted a host of awards and prizes. And this new book is the winner of the National Jewish Book Award for Fiction and the Association of Jewish Libraries Fiction Award. And Manya Wilkinson, who I've already had the fortune to meet when I was chairing the Wingate Prize event, is a Jewish New Yorker, but no longer living in New York, instead with me in the UK, but in Newcastle, where it's a bit cooler north of the country. And your latest book, Manya, Lublin, is the winner of this year's Wingate Literary Prize. And you're also the author of another novel, Ocean Avenue, collection of short stories, and many plays and radio dramas broadcast on the BBC. Now, it was such an interesting choice of Evie and the Jewish Book Council to put your two books together because on one hand, they're so completely different, and yet they're both rich and layered and intricate and all about storytelling. Because each of your books each of them has three key characters who go through the book on a journey of self-discovery through storytelling. So in Lublin, there's three boys, I think they're in their mid-teens, Ayla, Kiva, and his cousin Ziv, who set off from the village of Mitzrich towards Lublin with a suitcase of brushes to sell. So a very warm welcome to you, Manya. And you might want to unmute yourself, which will be useful for the conversation, but I always do this at the beginning of conversations. So.
A bit of spontaneity. Delighted to be here, Emily. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Songs for the Brokenhearted by Ayelet Tsabari has a dominant voice, Zahara, an Israeli who returns to Israel after the death of her mother, Saida. There's also her nephew, Yoni, who's struggling with the loss of Saida, who's his grandmother, and Yakub, who has been in love but not together with Saida most of his adult life. And there's so much storytelling in each of your books. I thought we'd begin by asking you each to read just a short passage from your book, which sort of focuses, you've chosen the passage as one which focuses on storytelling to give everyone a taste. So Manya, could I ask you to begin? And I think your passage needs no introduction.
Okay. All right. So it's the start of the journey. The sun is now high in the sky, and Kiva takes out his father's watch. His mother begged him to leave such a valuable item at home, but where would they be without it? Only 12:05, excellent time. But as the day advances, the road grows longer, and Kiva wonders when they'll be catching a carriage. He would like to stop and rest, but Elia urges him on. Soon you'll be resting on a feather-filled Lublin love seat, says Ilya, or on any of the vast and comfortable armchairs in the town. Lublin is only 102 kilometers south of Mizrich. At an average walking pace of 6 kilometers an hour, walking for 8 hours every day, Ilya determines that they will arrive in 2, maybe 3 days. In Lublin, there are great Jewish marketplaces, Jewish squares, fountains, theaters, stone-built synagogues, renowned yeshivas, statues of Polish heroes who are admittedly not Jewish, and statues of frowning lions who look Jewish with their expressions of finicky distaste, as if offered a pork ball or a crustacean to eat. Gazing past distant fields of a lilac hue, Ilya imagines Lublin just there, over the horizon, waiting to be discovered. Lublin, where all the fortunate inhabitants carry full purses, where the salt is saltier, the water wetter, the streets more than 6 cobbles wide. It's only a matter of time before Ilya and his friends arrive. Then Ziv needs to stop and nemen a kiss again.
Thank you so much, Manya. What a beautiful and rich description to start us off. It's almost real and yet mythical, as if something in the character's imagination, a kind of mixture of a fairy story and an old Yiddish tale. I'm wondering what inspired you in your depiction of Lublin?
Okay, well, I was inspired by stories my grandmother told me. Mizrich is actually my grandmother's town. She emigrated to the United States from Mizrich in 1910. And the stories themselves were fantastical and heightened. And I only had a little girl's imagination, so I went with that. And that was my original inspiration. My grandmother and all her sisters and brothers emigrated, with the exception of one brother who I never met and knew very little about. So I based Elia, the protagonist, the main character of this novel, on that brother who never left because he had been an ambitious boy and owned his own brush and bristle factory. So
That's really beautiful. And on some level, was the writing of this story a way to connect to that part of your past?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. To my to that world, to the stories I heard, to the Yiddish language, which was very important in my childhood, in my upbringing, and to the humor, to the sadness, to bring back that world that was indeed lost. You know, that I felt there wasn't enough contemporary literature about. very contemporary.
Yeah,
So,
it certainly feels, part of this canon of traditional Jewish tales from pre-war Europe. I'm wondering, was it something relatively recent? When did you first become interested in this genre? And is there a particular tale of your grandmother or from the greater canon which influenced you in your storytelling?
well, yeah, I was brought up on these stories. I love Isaac Bashevis Singer and the great, wonderful Shalom Aleichem. So I was channeling all that, but also my imagination. And I have sons myself. I delighted in writing from the point of view of 14-year-old boys, and the rest is it just comes together in that way. But a pure, I think the writer, one of the things the writer does, no matter what he or she is writing, is create a world. And this is a world I wanted to inhabit for a while. I wanted to bring to the reader. I wanted to bring to the reader in a contemporary way. I wrote it. It's in present tense. So I was hoping it would feel like it was happening right in front of you, and that time was just collapsed, so that there wasn't a past or a present. You were, the characters are more, have got a contemporary edge. It's voicey, hopefully edgy. So I was consciously trying to do a bit of that.
Yeah, you certainly get a sense, and a lovely comment in the chat talking about that in the brief passage that you read, they feel already immersed in your story because of the sensory palette taking you along on the road. And so interesting, the parallels with Ayelet and storytelling and grandmothers, which is so much part of your work, Ayelet. And could I ask you to read a passage? And you've chosen one narrated by Yoni, who recalls his grandmother storyteller of Saida, his grandmother.
Yeah, sure. I just also wanted to say how grateful I am to be here. And also, Manya, that I'm just like nodding so hard here. So many things that you said. I was like, first, I'm like, yeah, I feel that. Now that you said, of course, Shalom Aleichem, of course, Bashevis Singer, but also just like, the connection and the present tense. These are all things that make perfect sense to me as a reader. But also as a writer, I find so much resonance in it. All right, so I'm just going to start with no preamble necessary. Do you hear me okay? I'm sorry, I'm using other people's stuff, so not my computer. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Other grandmothers read books to their grandsons before bed. His told him stories. Tata's Yemen sounded like a fairy tale, a thrilling and terrifying place. There were wild barrels of monkeys in the hills, wolves and tigers, and some springs, locust swarms blackened the sky. The men caught them by the jarfuls and brought them home to their wives. The wives snapped off the insects' heads, legs, and wings, boiled the crispy bodies in water and salt, and sauteed them in a pan. Ooh, you ate bugs? Yoni twisted his face. Tata laughed. Locusts are kosher and a delicacy, rich in protein and fat. You would have liked them. In Yemen, there were demons and spirits, and the walls of one's house came alive at night with the sounds of the jinns, the jiran il bet. I could hear them every night as I went to sleep, she said in a whisper, enunciating to enhance the tension. The family of spirits would be living their lives, grinding wheat, drawing water, dancing and singing and eating meals too bland for a human stomach, for spices and salt upset the spirit's constitution. In Israel, whenever she mentioned the jinns, the people curled their eyebrows up, bewildered and amused. Tata mimicked their expression in an exaggerated way. Spirit, they said, in the walls? The queen of demons, Lilith, was so powerful she could shapeshift into a sheep or a tiger and ambush nomads and little children by water sources. Lilith was known to attack new mothers and their babies who were left alone, inflicting them with diseases and driving them to madness. And al-Subyan, who seduced long travelers and kidnapped children, lived in deep wells and her legs were the legs of a donkey. She walked around naked and her breasts were so large she flung them over her shoulder. If you see her, you say Shema Israel and make a lot of noise. It scares her into leaving. Thank you.
That's very beautiful. Thank you so much. And Ayelet, were you also drawing upon stories from your grandmother when you were writing this book?
Yeah, first of all, also the Lilith thing. When I was reading your book, Manya, I was like, oh my God, you have Lilith too. It was just like, really, I don't know how they put us together. Like you said, like in an unlikely pairing, but then maybe not, you know. It was I love that. The demons in your book as well. It's interesting because my grandmother didn't really tell stories. I knew we come from a tradition of storytellers, but she was so, she was so surviving that story. She didn't have the room for stories, until the end of her life, when I finally sat with her and started asking her questions and found so much inspirations in her stories. But I think one of the things that inspired me in my grandmother is that I think I was maybe a little bit judgmental as a young woman living in a modern place in a westernized society, and I kind of imagined her life to be small and sheltered, similarly to how Zohara looked at her own mother. And when I started hearing her stories, um, I remember my aunt telling me she was a feminist, like, 'cause she, she told me how she walked out on her husband when she was a second wife, which is something that you find in the book as well. I think I suddenly understood something about, first of all, my own prejudgments, which is something we see in the book a lot, facing our own judgments and our own misconceptions about our ancestors and about people in general. But also I was able to kind of settle something um, in my head, because the women in my family, they also always seemed so strong and so like badasses, and yet I knew how hard their lives were and how they couldn't, they had to walk behind their husbands and they couldn't be seen in public and all of that. And there was something about those stories that I heard that helped me. I understood suddenly where they found the rebelliousness, right? Where how it was different. I cannot look at it in the lens of today. I have to understand um, something about their lives. And we can talk more about this, but I want to leave room for a conversation. But yeah.
That is so beautiful, because I certainly got a sense that perhaps then your own understanding, your own journey of self-awareness and remaking what you had, your own judgments about your family is the journey that Zahava takes us on through the book. Because at the beginning she's so dismissive of her mother, and I live this, I'm doing a PhD in New York and I'm fancy and very and then she sees finds out more clues as the story progresses, and therefore questions everything she knows, especially about being a woman. I felt that was a very strong theme in the book.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very, very nice. And interestingly, of course, in almost again a parallel way with Manya, you were talking about her spirits and her jinns, and you meet even in the little passage
Love
that you
that.
shared with us, the mixture of the mundane eating of the locust and these jinns. And I'm wondering how whether you struggled putting these two worlds together in the same sentences.
Oh, I think that's the beauty of it. That's the joy. That's the surprise. That juxtaposition that we don't, no one expects. And those things were very real. In that world, that was real.
Yeah.
That existed. It was a magical time. And honoring that, I think, and also it existed in daily life, not in some obscure setting. It was a daily life, thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so strong in both of your work, that you take
Yeah.
us to a moment where these things are believable, where
Oh yeah.
that feels so powerful. I get it. I'm wondering if you went on a journey as well to understand people for whom those worlds were real, are real.
Yeah, yeah, and I love what you said, Manya. It wasn't just believable; it was real. You know, it
Yeah.
was real. And I've heard. I remember when one of the people I consulted with, she's a PhD and she teaches, Yemeni culture and history. And even when she spoke about it, she's Yemeni as well. She said, "Oh, I heard an explanation of why there were no demons in Israel." And I'm like, "Okay, tell me." And she totally approached it very matter of factly. I love that. And she said, "Oh, because the demons were afraid of metal. That's why they would put sometimes knives under the cushions or the pillows of babies to protect
Yeah.
them." And she said, and of course, Israel is so much more industrialized. There was so much metal everywhere. So that's why there's no demons there. And I like really admire the way she,
Wonderful.
positioned it. She, this is real and this is the explanation.
Mm.
And I think some of the, when we're talking about some of the cultural gaps between families, the migrants who came from Yemen and the children and grandchildren who were born in Israel, I feel like there was a lot of pain there in that, in how not only they were dismissed but also like disbelieved. Oh, that nonsense. And actually later on in that section that I read, the daughter says to Saida, she said to her, "Oh, stop filling his head with nonsense. Like he doesn't need any more anxiety in his life."
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
and I really developed kind of empathy um toward that position. And maybe me being an immigrant at a certain point and watching my own kid kind of growing a little bit away from me, maybe that gave me that point of view, that perspective, and allowed me to feel my grandparents uh
Mm.
pain in a new way.
Yeah, I certainly felt that a very deep empathy is, really evident in both your books for your characters, that you love them, you feel for them, you're with them on their journeys. And they aren't any characters because both of your books are about knowing people who haven't been recorded in history books, young Jewish men on the cusp of adulthood in Tsarist Russia, or Yemenite women, some illiterate on the margins of Jewish Israeli history. And I'm wondering for both of you how much of a motivation this was.
Mhm. Wow. You want to take
Yeah,
that
go
up?
on, just go on.
Yeah,
Manya, go on.
you want me to
Yes,
answer
if
first?
you have
Yeah,
something.
of course. I have to say, like when I'm asked about a lot of times when we write, there's an element of kind of mystery about why we do things. We can't always tell you. It's like we write in a certain tense, so we write a certain voice, and then we go back and we're like, "Oh yeah, of course that makes sense. I did that because of that." But it's kind of, I sometimes say it's like falling in love. You fall in love first, and then you go and you're like, "Well, it makes sense that I love this person, this and this and that." So there's a lot of that. Um, but I feel like with the representation piece, that was something that I did consciously, because when I started writing in English, but even before, when I started writing, I never really thought that this was a story. And when you don't see, yourself, and when you don't see those kind of stories in literature, then naturally you don't, you grow up to not think that they're story worthy. So I needed some shift in my mind to think like, wait a second, but why not? Like I can I can do this. I can, like contribute somehow. um put these characters on a literary stage. So yeah, it was a conscious decision to um, celebrate these characters, to make them present in books, which they absolutely are deserving, and their stories are. So yeah, I would say it was definitely a motivation for me.
Yeah, and I know some of your previous work has also addressed some similar issues. And what about for you, Manya?
Yeah, I was just thinking that an odd thing about writing sometimes is the more specific you are, the more smaller, the more detailed and ungeneral specific the writing is, the more universal it becomes. You know, it's just a crazy truth.
I know.
And
It's so true.
you know, I worried about, you know, how this was such a Jewish experience that I was writing about. How would that play in Yorkshire, you know, in places where people didn't have a clue about that, and found that, you know, it's a coming of age story, you know, or a falling in love story. You know, these are primal experiences that people have, and the more specific you are, the more you love those ordinary characters and rejoice in the ordinary things they do, the more universal it becomes.
Yeah.
So, you know, crazily, don't know why.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think that's right, because I guess it gives us enough detail, even though we're not from that world, many of us, or at least haven't experienced it firsthand, to be able ourselves to step on your journey of the three young men, or step into the journey of Zahava, who is refinding her roots and re-navigating her identity. Gives us enough. We need to have a handle, we need to picture it in our mind. And because you are so brilliant, both of you, of painting particular circumstances and descriptions, that allows us that handle as
I think
readers.
when I think about it, I think it's because readers kind of, that's why we read, right? We really read to relate and to feel. So we're looking for ourselves in every book we read. And then when you do it, when you are so specifically, say, when you create a world, you're allowing us to enter it and immerse ourselves in it and feel like we're there. And then we find all these resonance in the characters. We find that thing that is, you know, like, we're like, oh yeah, I've you know, I felt that. I was heartbroken. I, you know, felt loss. I was, you know, I felt shame and all of these things. And yeah, but I totally agree with you.
And also, you know, both of your books are about this journey, the journey, literal journey of these young men trying to find Lublin, and the journey of you know, relatively young woman trying to make sense of her mother, who she never really knew and just dismissed. And I'm wondering about, you know, your narrative arc and how you thought about the structure of your books in that form in order to help people signpost their way through that journey and stay with you.
Yeah.
Ayelet, do you want to kick off first?
No, I'm going to let Manya do it now.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So, yes, I thought about journey, and Ayelet, it's so interesting to hear you talk about the journey of your novel as the change of relationship between this woman and her mother. So a journey is always a transformation, whether it's an actual journey or not. The fact that in my book it's an actual journey is a gift, you know, because I always like to think of something Chekhov said, which was, if you put three characters in a troika, you know, the great short story writer and playwright Chekhov, Anton Chekhov, if you put three characters in a troika, you've got a story, you know, because they're moving, you know, and three, of course, three is the magic number for conflict and problems arising. So yeah, that's my feeling about. So you know, the novel needs to start in one place and end somewhere different. You know, in its most simple. We both teach creative writing, don't we? And you know, it's just the most fundamental thing. So yeah, you try to make that happen.
And I'm wondering, through that process, there's a lovely question come in the Q&A. Did anything surprise either of you about your characters as you wrote them, and they developed that you didn't intend to put in at the beginning in your kind of plotting of how the book would unfold? You're nodding there, Manya, so I'm going to turn to you.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, you plan and you plan. You know, a novel is a big deal and it takes a while to write, and I do plan. But, you know, you have to hold your plan then very lightly, and you have to
Mhm.
allow accidents to happen.
Yeah.
You can't be so rigid. And of course, yes, that did. Can't, you know, often. And then you decide which ones are good and which, you know, you don't really want. But
Do you remember any that you kept in that weren't part of the original plan? Any little anecdote or
I think I don't want to tell you too much about it, but I think that each of the three boys in the novel they have different outcomes in their journey, and Kiva's surprised me. So if you read the novel, I hadn't intended that,
okay.
but
That's super cool. It makes up even more reason for everybody to buy it and read the
yes.
book afterwards. Ayelet, tell me more about how your characters develop, because the central
Yeah.
character, obviously on the surface, has a lot of, you know, biographical similarities to you and your life journey. And I'm wondering how
Mhm.
you navigated that superficial similarity.
But yeah, well, first I'm going to talk to you about the surprises that
Okay.
I found, because I love that question. I remember as a child when I used to write, like sometimes I'd be upset because as I was writing, I realized that something terrible is going to happen to one of my characters, and I'm like, oh no, why? But you know, it just kind of that sort of surprise introduced itself, and I followed through. And with the book, like, you know, like Manya said, of course there's like an idea of where I'm going, and there's spots along the way, but I don't always know how I get there. You know, I know we're going to get there, and it's like kind of a few anchors along the way, but the way to each one of them could be a surprise. But for me, the biggest surprise was actually Yoni, because Zohara was fairly clear to me as a character, and the journey too, and of course Saida and Yagub, but Yoni wasn't even a part of the first. You know, I wouldn't know. I don't know if it was the draft, but in my mind, he wasn't a part of it, and he really just showed up and made himself known. You know, and I was like, but no, I'm writing a book about women, and I need another female character. Maybe you could be a girl. And he's like, I'm not a girl. I don't know what to tell you, right? It's not going to happen. This is who I am. And he just really, it was very insistent. His voice and his story was really insistent. So that's, to me, is like the biggest surprise that was in the novel.
And do you want to just briefly give listeners, viewers, a sense of him as a character and
So you're,
why he surprised you, why he showed up in that
yeah.
way without giving everything away?
Okay, so Yoni is Zohara's teenage nephew. So it is, if it's a generational story, he's like the youngest generation. We have Saida, we have Zohara, her daughter, and then we have Yoni, who is her nephew. He's the son of Zohara's sister. And he was very, very close to Saida. So he allowed a certain view of Saida that Zohara couldn't. Zohara, so like set in her ways, could not really, she didn't have access to that part of Saida. Her love to him, her storytelling came, you know, when she was talking to Yoni, not when she was talking to Zohara. And again, in that excerpt I read, she said, oh, they weren't interested, like that my daughters weren't interested. So she gives him all of her stories, and he becomes like the person who keeps her secrets, who keeps her history, who keeps her stories for her. But also he becomes involved in some, you know, like it's the time of the later day story is in the 90s, around Oslo. So he becomes involved in some of those protests, and he becomes radicalized a little bit because he's so grief-stricken after Saida's death. So yeah, that was for me also a way to sort of, I'm not interested in only writing characters like me, and everyone's talking about how Zahara is similar to me, and she is, but she also isn't. But I wanted to portray a boy who becomes radicalized, who was very right-wing at the time, because, you know, it's easy, again, when you're grief-stricken, lonely adolescent boy, to become kind of swayed and dragged into trouble.
Mm.
So yeah, I really wanted to explore that, and he was a way for me to do that.
And you've
That's the
hit
transformation we were that's the transformation we were talking about, always occurring. And also the other thing about planning a novel or building a novel or structuring a novel is that it needs to build. It needs to become more and more serious or crucial or heightened, I think, is another thing I thought about. And one of the things I think sometimes is when things are not progressing, I think to myself, now something even worse happens, so I just run that line through my head. So constantly building the tension.
That's so interesting
Yeah.
because both of you, as people who've not only written but have taught literature for so long, it's so fantastic having this discussion with you because I feel we're all learning so much about some of the process because you've taught and then you've used your learnings and what you've learned from your students and the process of teaching, through your writing. And I'm interested, having you both taught for so long, about how the process of writing the book changed you as a person.
That's a big one.
I know.
In some way, or what element has it changed, if any?
Oh,
I don't know.
yeah, I don't know how to answer that one either. It's just, it's a powerful thing to do. It takes a long time. You surface from it different, I think.
Yeah.
Different?
Yeah, I think I was more affected by the things that I had experienced, heard, my heritage. I just rejoiced in that more. I found, actually, it's all I want to write about, which is problematic.
Because it was,
It is not.
So I get a
It is
sense that
not.
you being immersed in that world, Manya, has made you feel even more passionate about writing and researching and communicating it as if a kind of imperative, because you've been to Lublin, you've been on that road with these young men, and you want to tell more stories back from that other universe. Is that right? Yeah.
And I even at the last minute decided not to go. So I was going to go to. Oh,
sorry, go on, carry on. My microphone just decided to fall there. Go on, Manya.
I was going to go to Rich, which no longer exists, of course, in the way it did. It's now a Polish town called Mizęzyzycz. So it's an EU town, and I thought, if I go, what will I do? I'll look down at the cobbles, I'll look up at the sky, it exists more strongly in my mind. And I wanted to hold that precious something and not face the reality of, this town today. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think what you're saying actually kind of inspires my answer now too, because I think, well, obviously I knew that, you go on such a long and, intensive process, something does change. But I think for me too, it was like, it did reinforce, I would say, my connection to my heritage, but also in the process of researching and writing the book, I started to I really delved deeply into the tradition of the women's songs. And if we're talking about storytelling, I feel like it's important to say that this was the way the Yemeni women told their stories. Like they were illiterate and they told their stories by singing songs about their lives, songs in Arabic that they then, passed on from mother to daughter, and they changed a little bit every time someone sang them. It was a very dynamic kind of tradition. And for me, as I started learning to sing and learning the songs and reading them and translating some of them and then including some in the book, and also making small changes as I was including them in the book, because I realized, suddenly it dawned on me, I'm like, wait a second, you're a Yemeni Israeli woman, you're a Yemeni Jewish woman, you're a storyteller. It's your kind of responsibility to do a little bit of changing as you do it. And I felt like, okay, I became a part of this, a part of that tradition. I am now disseminating, that those stories that were passed on from between the women. And that was such that kind of moment of understanding that that's what is happening and that's what I'm doing. That really delighted me, and I felt honored by it, and proud uh,
Mm,
to be
that's
able to do that. Yeah.
That's so powerful, because Zahava gets so excited when she realizes that her mother has changed the words, and her mother is an
Hmm.
active creator, not just a teller of or singing some old songs, but she is a creative force. And it
Yeah,
sounds
that's
like
right.
you are almost, taking the mantle from Saida yourself as a creative Yemenite Jewish Israeli. And
Yeah.
that's beautiful and powerful.
Yeah. Thank
That
you.
that's very, very lovely, and the poems are really beautiful. And somebody asked quite a fun question in the chat about whether you dreamt as you were writing the novel about the characters, and if so, did that inform your work? I don't know, either of you did any dreaming? Was any dreaming involved?
Oh, I don't know. I think there's a point at which sometimes when you get to the end of a novel, that everything you encounter resonates. So wherever you go, whatever you do,
You
it
see it.
seems like it could get into the novel, or it's speaking to something in the novel. So I've had
Yeah.
that experience. You feel a bit crazy, and you're walking around with a notebook writing things down, because just the world is coming together in this
Yeah.
uh, dream. I don't know. I have these very ordinary dreams, like I call them elevator dreams. I get into the elevator, the door
That's hilarious.
closes, I go up, nothing. I don't know what to do about
I,
it.
one of the things that is, in a way, another parallel between your books, between both your books, is the time shifting in both directions. Because, to tell the story of the unfolding characters, and in your book, Manya, these characters are set, in the early 20th century, and yet there's a sort of narrator voices foretelling what will happen, the Holocaust, the revolution, these other things that these characters enable us. So we look at them, we feel more protective as a reader because we know things they don't know. And in
Hmm.
your book, Ayelet, you move time between the early mid 50s, when the Yemenite family you described, the two key characters, they come to Israel, and then in the 90s during the Oslo
Hmm.
time, which you describe, and you're going back and forth, and yet there's a clarity of it. And I'm wondering about this time shifting and how you thought about it and why you both chose to include it.
I think it was definitely a big factor in my writing. Because I think that what the reader brings to the novel is, as you were saying, Emily, is a knowledge of what the future is going to be for these boys, no matter what happens on this journey. And there's something sad, elegiac, about that you can never, no matter how many jokes or how funny, you can never get rid of. And the reader has that powerful knowledge, which is a nice thing about writing historical fiction. I also love writing historical fiction because I think the past sometimes is more mysterious than the future. I found it wonderfully mysterious. Um, uh,
Mysterious? Can you explain more? In what way?
well, because we don't know exactly what happened and how it happened, and there's just enough signposts around which to imagine and embellish and dare to think that this could have been this way or that way. It gave me a lot of freedom while anchoring
Mm.
me somehow. Um,
Hmm. That's very
So
interesting, and it addresses quite another question that was in the chat about the mix between sort of fiction and reality, about being anchored and yet being liberated. And Ayelet, what's your thought about the way that you chose these two time periods and you shifted between them?
Yeah, and I want to say too that I really appreciated that sort of element in Manya's book, you know, like that flash forwards that you've done, kind of allowing, you know, a glimpse into the future. And this is something I've done in memoir, but I've never done that in fiction. I really like that, you know, because in memoir it seems obvious that I know more than the narrator at that moment, you know, like, so it allowed me to be like, years later, this is what's going to happen, and employ the future tense. I really, really appreciated that. For me, first of all, I think my next book is going to have to be simpler. It was too complicated. You know, like I want to write something very, you know, small. But because I was writing, it's too big of a topic to get into right now, but because I was mentioning the missing Yemenite and Mizrahi and Balkan children, and because I knew that I wanted to write about the 50s, and the 90s actually at first was just a technical thing. It was like, how far can I go in time to have Zohara have a brother who went missing? And when we landed on the 90s, this is, I'm talking very, very early, when the book is just kind of gestating and it's more like back to dreaming. It's more in a dream kind of state and it's not even a thing. And then when I realized it was the 90s, I was really pleased. First of all, because I thought of, you know, Oslo, and I feel like the 50s and the 90s are very much, and today, sadly, are very much tied. If you look at history in bigger ways, and you have those, like, if history is the structure of a novel, and you have like those anchors, you know, and how do you get there? So I was like, that makes perfect sense. But also because the 90s is a time in my life that I enjoyed evoking and enjoyed spending time in, and knew how to evoke because I kind of came of age at that time. So it ended up just, it started from a purely technical reason. It just what worked. But then once I knew that was it, I was very pleased with that. Yeah.
It was very beautiful. And did you, in your writing process, write both these stories simultaneously? And I'm also interested in Manya, in these foretelling, whether you put them in later or as you wrote along. How did you manage that writing process, Ayelet? And then to
I
you,
think
Manya.
in the very first draft, yes, I kind of just wrote whatever felt right. I like my first drafts to be fairly raw and intuitive in a sense. So it's kind of like, you know, I later on had to shift those weaving. Also with the reveal of information, you know, like I didn't want everything, because there are some reveals in the book. So I needed to be very conscious of that. But in the beginning, it just kind of like music almost. Okay, now there's a moment where it feels like there should be a change or a shift, or a shift in tone, or a shift in settings, or so on. So again, it's one of those things that I said before about the mystery of the writing process. There was something intuitive about how it kind of followed at that original initial stage.
And what about you, Manya, with those moments of foretelling, how they became part of your novel?
Well, in a very different way, I can't write a very quick first draft. I need to obsess about the voice and the tone. It's almost as if, I've tried to explain this, I don't know, I'm almost as if I don't see it, I hear it. So the cadence, the rhythm, you know, the literal storytelling of it is really important to me. So you know, I'm a slower writer, so I come up with a more finished first draft. But then, of course, you see potentials here and there, and I think that that compression of time and mentioning the future occurred to me quite early. So I put it in many ways. Yeah. So not only is the past the reader's present in a way, because I tried to evoke it in the senses and intimately, but the future is mixed up in that. And yeah, so that was one of my intentions. But some of these things are just lucky. And what the writer's skill is to see it, to see it and grab it, or, that's fruitful. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. And there's been a number of questions, and I wanted to turn to the the kind of elephant in the room question, as in the moment. It's the moment since October the 7th. There's the moment of what's going on, which I know is directly affecting you, Ayelet, trying to get back home to Israel and to your family, and about what, in the importance of telling these Jewish stories in this time and always, about how that moved you, how that inspired you, some of the challenges around that. I'm really keen, and I think a lot of the people on this call would like to know around that, in terms of publishing them, in terms of the reception they've received, because they're both such Jewish stories, and in your case, Ayelet, Israeli story.
Yeah.
Do you want to kick off, Ayelet?
Yeah, it's something I'm asked about often, and it's there's no sugarcoating it. Obviously, it affects the way the book does in readership. I am. I mean, I don't know what to say about this. It's disappointing, naturally, when people won't even read it because of my name and where I live, and the fact that it's clearly a book about, that takes place largely in Israel. But also, like, publishing is a finicky business, and there's always stuff, and there's always something, and it's not like you can really count on anything. So I'm just, it's what it is, what it is. I'm really grateful for all the readers that do read it. I'm really grateful for all the people who do write to me and, tell me personally that they enjoyed it. And I'm really grateful to the Jewish Book Council, and, and for this award and this recognition. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough. It's hard. It's difficult,
It
but
is.
it is such a beautiful book that for those that do get the opportunity to read it, that I think they'll be transported. I was just saying to Ayelet earlier that I read it, lying in bed. I just gobbled it up in a day and a half, because it was just quite so compelling, and that was on my iPad, which is not my preferred way of reading. So Manya, tell me about, for you, writing this book, this Jewish book at this time.
Well, it felt really. I think I just want to preface this by saying you have to write the stories you have to write. You have to tell the tales you have to tell. No, as Ayala was saying, no matter what the time is, no matter what publishing is doing, no matter what people are thinking. And living as I do in the north of England, it felt very private and very, it's not the dominant culture. I'm originally a New Yorker. That was a very different experience growing up and living in New York City. But and I'm a bit of a private person and very sensitive to people's opinion of me and the reception this would have. But I had to do it. It was like I didn't have a choice. And yes, surely it's a difficult time, and the rise of anti-Semitism is so terribly unfortunate and heartbreaking. But as writers, we cannot let these things become obstacles. Maybe it's even more of a reason to tell our truths.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I mean, there's been so much richness, and I'm pleased that this conversation's been recorded and will be available in a couple of weeks. I've just noted a few thoughts that I thought were so beautifully powerful. Is the importance of putting characters on the literary stage to make them present, and both of you have done this by being so present and taking us into your world so beautifully. And about being the more specific and the smaller you can be, it can become more universal because it creates a world that allows us to enter. The notion as a journey, as a transformation that you need to take your readers on. And it needs to become more heightened, you said. It needs to build. You need to get those climaxes and the reveals to allow, as well as allowing accidents to happen in the process of writing. And then about how, you know, the writing of this books, you know, for each of you has reinforced your connection to heritage, and that, you know, part of your tradition is an active process that you are part of. You're not just reflecting on the past, but it's a continual, you know, you're in the inheritor and the propagator, and will continue to leave other people to carry on the tradition, which is so, so beautiful. And about the way you both write with signposts to anchor, but give you freedom. And yeah, it was just, and the imperative that you both ended with to write these Jewish stories at this time becomes even a greater beautiful thing to do, to share them amongst Jews and non-Jews, to have greater insight and understanding. So it's been just such a huge privilege to be able to join you in conversation. I'm very, very grateful. Ayelet Tsabari and Manya Wilkinson, thank you so, so very much. And for all the brilliant questions that have come in both in the chat and in the Q&A. And I just wish we had more time, because there's so many beautiful, beautiful thoughts. At least you can see some of each other's, and maybe Evie could put some of the Q&A in the chat so everybody can benefit from some of those lovely thoughts from all of the people who've been able to take part in this conversation today. So thank you so much. And back to you, Evie.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all so much. What an incredible conversation. Hold on, I'm in the zone. Hello, everyone. Thank you so, so much. Ayelet, Manya, Emily, that was incredible. Everyone for coming, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you at one of our future events, either virtually or in person in the future. I'm in the dark. It just happens. This is how it happens. But thank you all so much. And if you would like to, we put links for all the organizations and the Global Jewish Literary Alliance in the chat. So if you'd like to see any information or anything about that, as well as buy their books, the link to the bookshop is in the chat as well. Thank you all so much.
Brilliant, thank you. And I really do recommend these two books are brilliant and well worth reading. So please do go ahead and read them.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.